Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll start the Zevachim daf Yud Gimel. We're going to begin on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph by the new Mishnah. Says the Masnis, HaPesach v'Chatas, which we've been learning already in the previous Mishnah as well as the first Mishnah on daf Beis. When it comes to a carbon Pesach as well as a Chatas, sheshachtan shol shman. Now we know if it was shechted not lishma, then it's going to be pasul. But it's not just when it comes to the shechita that you had an improper machshava. You were namely thinking about it being a different carbon than the one that it was. Let's say you had an improper thought during kibel, v'holach, mazarch sholashman, during the other stages of the avoda, being mekabel the dam, or the bringing of that blood toward the mizbeach, or its sprinkling. If at any of those avodos, according to this opinion, the person has an improper machshava, namely thinking that it should be for a different carbon, o lishman, o shelo lishman, o shelo lishman, lishman, psulin. Which means that even during the same machshava, same avoda, you have two thoughts. You have one thought which is proper, about this is the correct carbon, but another one which is not. So the Mishnah elaborates. So let's say we're dealing with a carbon Pesach, and let's say you're shechting it l'shem Pesach, which is good, but also l'shem shlamim. So that's shelo l'shman, or shelo l'shman l'shman. What is that? So originally you had an improper thought l'shem shlamim l'shem Pesach. So we don't say that, well, since you originally had your proper thought, that's all that matters. We go buster the tchila sidia, or perhaps we go after your corrected thought. No, all of these things will passel, even though you had the right thought, but you had also an improper thought. Shehazevach nifsel ba'arba devarim. We know that a carbon is requiring four things, and therefore, without it being done lishma, will passel it through the b'shchita, b'kibol, v'hilach, v'zrika. And the chiddush is even b'hilach. Rabbi Shimon machsher b'hilach. We have a machlokas. Now Shimon disagrees with the Tanakama and holds, maybe I agree with everything else, but not when it comes to hiluch, bringing the dam to the mizbeach. Shahai oimer yesh shlo b'shchita, shlo b'kabala, shlo b'zrika. There's three of the four avodos that you can't get around. You have to shech the animal, you have to be mekabel in the dam of klishars, and you have to do the zrika. Efshir below hiluch. It's possible that hiluch can never even take place. Therefore, because of that, sheichet b'tzad mizbeach v'zarik, you can just shecht it mamish right by the mizbeach and sprinkle it. So since you could cut that whole thing completely, so therefore it's not going to be ma'akev in the event that it was shlo shma. Again, the question is, well, so what? Maybe it's not an enot tzarech, but still the question is, if you do it, then it should be done properly. Okay, so but that's the second opinion. Rabbi Eliezer comes up with almost a middle ground. He says like this: if it's in a place where you need to bring it, in other words, it's you shechted it far away, then machshava poiselas, because you do need to do hiluch. But if you would have done hiluch, let's say you were literally a foot away from the mizbeach, and then you could have just done the zrika, but instead you decided to do move your feet a couple of inches and do hiluch, but it was shlo shma. So that doesn't matter because it's considered to be a makom she'eno sarich. Okay, so those are the three opinions. So now let's continue the Gemara. The Kabbalah mi pasla. So we're saying that when you're mekabel the dam and you have an improper machshava, that'll passel. Is that true of Osanya? But we learn the pasuk says, "V'shachat es ben habakar lifnei Hashem," that you do the shchita of the carbon in front of Hashem. V'yikrivu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es adam, and they will be makriv the dam. Right? So what is that referring to? Zu kabal sadam, says the Gemara. That's referring to it catching it. So ato imer kabal sadam, o eno el zrika. Maybe that's referring to the sprinkling. Okay, shoimer. The pasuk then says v'zarku asadam al mizbeach. So obviously har zrika imer. So how many mekayim v'ikrivu? So the fact that the pasuk first says v'ikrivu, then it says v'zarku. Zu Kabbalah Sadam. Obviously, it's talking about a avoda that precedes it. B'nei Aaron HaKohanim, and the pasuk says B'nei Aaron HaKohanim, that they're the ones that are makriv it. Shetehei b'kayin kosher. It has to be kayin kosher. Obviously, it's coming to exclude a cholol or someone who has a mum. So Rashi says ub'kli shadas. It also has to be in a proper kli. And Rashi says shehei milavushim bigdei kahuna. That's actually coming to say that the kayin has to be wearing his proper begadim. Okay. Omer Rabbi Akiva menayin l'kabbalah shlo tehei ella b'kayin kasher b'kli sharas. I know that's a requirement. So nemer kan b'nei Aharon in this pasuk, v'nemer l'holon, and it's said in Sefer B'Midbar, ela shmois b'nei Aaron hakohanim hamushachim asher mili yadam l'kahin. So we have that over there referring to the b'nei Aaron. So. And it says, "Ela shmois b'nei Aharon hakohanim u'shachim." So ma'al b'kayin kosher. Obviously, we're talking about the b'nei Aharon. These are kosher kohanim. They're not kohanim that are chalalim, right? They're children of Aharon. V'kli sharas avkan b'kayin kosher v'kli sharas. So Reb Tarfin, akafeach et banai, cut off the life of my children. He always dramatically says this statement, which is always quite unusual. But this is actually his language that he often cites. Imlo shemaiti, if I didn't hear l'havchin hefresh bin Kabbalah zrika. There's a distinction between Kabbalah Sadam and the Zrika Sadam. Vainly farish, but there's not one for me to explain. So Rabbi Kiva ani efresh, I'll explain too. Kabbalah lo asaba machshava kamaisa. Zrika asaba machshava kamaisa. There's distinctions. So Rabbi Kiva says that maybe when it says B'nei Aharon, it's Kol Shehin, any of these guys. So what exactly is the difference between, and therefore it doesn't have to be necessarily B'kli Sharis, it doesn't have to be a proper Kayin when it comes to that aspect of the Avoda. So, because Kabbalah, lo asabo machshava kamaisa, we don't consider the thought like an action, says Rashi. So hashta sakadaitach dikamer ein machshava poiselas, that even having improper machshava during Kabbalah, apparently that doesn't do anything. It's not a problem. Im teshuba chutz l'zmano ishol shmoi. Let's say you have a pigul machshava that you're planning on eating it outside of the proper time, or sprinkling outside the proper time, or shlol shma, lo possible kabbalah. So apparently, when it comes to shlol shma or pigul, there's no passeling over there. But zrika asaba machshava kamaisa. That a machshava, or when it comes to zrika, causes problems. If you have the machshava b'shas zrika, that you're planning on consuming it chutz l'zmanai, outside of its designated time, or shalom shema, it's possible. So again, right off the bat, we find he says that Kabbalah is lo asaba machshava kamaisa. Kiblu b'chutz enu chayv kares, zark b'chutz einish kares. Furthermore, Kabbalah has another leniency that if you did the Kabbalah outside, so then you're not chayv kares. However, if you did zrika sadam outside of the designated place, you are chayv kares. Kabluhu psulin in chayavin alav, zarku psulin chayavin alav. So, if let's say you have a non-kayin, Rashi says, or any other person, if you do the Kabbalah, you're not going to be chayav misas beistin. However, he brings other cases, shisui yayin. Okay, in chayavin alav misa to be in an avoida tamah. Shin achareha avoida. However, zrika it is, right? We said before, it has to be avoida tama, that there's no other avoda after it. Well, Kabbalah, there's an avoda of zrika afterwards. So zrika is where it ends. So zrika is one of the times in which a non-Kohen who would do the avoda would be chayev misa b'dishmayim. So we see a few distinctions between zrika and Kabbalah. And most notably is that apparently it says that when it comes to Kabbalah, since it's lo yasaba machshava kamaisa, if you have an improper machshava that you think it's a different carbon, apparently will not passel. So that is obviously a kasha, okay? So based on what we saw in our Mishnah. So Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Tarfon, Havoida, I swear, im hatis, if you didn't move, Yamina Smoil to the right or to the left, Ani Shemati, I would have heard this, Ve'en li lefarish, and I would not know the explanation. Ata darish umaskim l'shmua b'loshen hazeh, Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, kol parish mimcha kaparish mechayim. This is the language of about Akiva. Anyone who separates from you, regarding to you, Rabbi Akiva, anyone who separates from you, it's like you separated from life. In other words, you are able to come up with a beautiful pshat so much that you bring us life. And obviously, Parish Mechayiv, because he was actually threatening his life or his kids, whatever that means. But the point is that we have a kasha. We see clearly Rabbi Akiva holds that when it comes to Kabbalah, machshava is not kamaisa, and therefore, apparently that means, in the Havamim at least, is that if a person has a machshava shlo l'shma, that it's not, but shas Kabbalah won't passel. So I'm Rav Kasha. Kan b'machshavas pigul, kan machshavas shlo l'shma. No, there when it says a machshava is not kamaisa, that's referring to pigul. That during the time of Kabbalah you have a machshava that I'm going to eat this chutz l'zmanai, so in that situation it doesn't apply. Because the din of pigul has to be during the time of the avoda, which is, there's an achila. Either the achila of a kohen, or the achilas mizbeach, like consumption of mizbeach, like for example the zrika. So there's no din pigul b'shas Kabbalah. However, shlo l'shma does still apply when it comes to Kabbalah. So pigul doesn't apply by Kabbalah, only shlo l'shma does. De'ekanami de'tani, we learned shehazevach nifsol, v'lokatani mispagel shmamina. It doesn't say that it's nifsol, it says it's nifsol. It doesn't say it's mispagel. Okay, says Rashi, de'tanu rasdisin lo ari b'machshavas pigul. Our Mishnah is not talking about pigul at all, right? So our Mishnah, which says there is some type of din that something, there's a apostles, but Kabbalah is not talking about pigul. Our Mishnah is talking about shlo l'shma, which makes sense because we haven't really talked about pigul up until this point in this Masechta, except maybe a little bit, but not really. So all these Mishnayos certainly are only talking about shlo l'shma. So now the Gemara says, 1 second, machshavas pigul will apostle by Kabbalah. So now it's going the opposite side, saying, okay, fine. So by Kabbalah, taka by shlo l'shma apostles, but doesn't it also by pigul? Avosanya yochol yehe machshava mo'eles el bezrika. Bilvad, you would think that having a machshava at the time of zrika, again almanas, let's say you should eat from this carbon on the third day when it's beyond its proper time. It's chutz l'zmanai, so that certainly is a problem. But maybe menayin l'rabba shchita the Kabbalah, maybe even also Kabbalah. Talmud loimer v'im ha'achal ya'achal me'baser zevach shloma pigul hu yiratze b'devarim hamavin le'diachila hakasam adaber, things that are leading up to achila, which therefore means even Kabbalah. So yachashan emar b'av shvichas shirayim. Maybe it's also when it comes to the spilling of the leftovers. It says Rashi, im shafach shiri hadam. Let's say if you spilled the leftover blood onto the yisoid, al minas lechel baser chutz l'zmanai. So maybe if you're doing that when it comes to the extra bloods, or Rashi says, or im hikter imurim, that you remakter the sacrificial parts with this machshava, you would think also then it would passel with pigul. Talmud loimer v'yom hashlishi yiratza hamakriv oiso lichashev zrika b'chalal hoisa. So it mentions about zrika. So v'lama yotzal, why is it excluding it? Lahakish leha loimer chama zrika miyuchedes shehi avoida. It's one of the dal avoidas. Umakeves kapara, and if you don't do it, it makiv the kapara. So af koil avoda makeves kapara. So it comes to exclude all things which are makiv the kapara. Which again, it doesn't talk about hiluch, because maybe hiluch is not makiv kapara, because he could have shechted it right near the mizbeach. That's the whole idea behind whence is being brought to. But we see clearly that when it comes to, it's not just zrika, But anything which is like Zrika, in which it's ma'akiv the avoda, namely shchita, as well as Kabbalah, taka we see there should be a din pigul. So we see that even by Kabbalah there's a din pigul. So how do we get out of this? So on this we continue on Yud Gimel Midbeis, and the Gemara says like this: Ella lo kasha. It's not really a question, because again, how do we understand when it says it seems like a stira? Our Mishnah says that Kabbalah apostles, but yet we see this line when it says lo asaba machshava kamaisa. So we said, oh, that's referring to pigul, but it can't be referring to pigul, because maybe there is pigul also by Kabbalah. Hello kasha hadiyim hareini sheichet amnas kabel dama lamachar. This case, it's still okay. It's not considered to be pigul in this situation, because you said, I'm going to shech this on condition that I will be makabel the dam tomorrow. So this is not pigul, it's only if he has das at the time of the shechita for the zrika to be chutz lizman. But it's pigul with the wrong machshava of Kabbalah during Kabbalah, right? So again, this case is not going to be an issue. Hadiyamar haredi makabel dama. I'm going to be makabel the dama. I'm not lishmach shirayim to shech the left to spill the shirayim lamachar. So again, this case of you said I'm going to shech the nasa kabel dama lamachar is not pigul. It's only again if he has intention at the time of the shchita for the zrika to be chutz l'zman. But here he said, at the time of the shechita, I want these that I'm going to do the Kabbalah chutz l'zman. So it's interesting. So that is the case. So again, if b'shas Kabbalah you have in mind that I'm going to spill the dam in the wrong time, then it's a problem. However, if b'shas shchita you had condition that you're going to eventually do the Kabbalah at the wrong time, that doesn't constitute pigul. And therefore that's what it means, that the machshava is not like a maisa. It means that if you have a machshava about Kabbalah, shlo b'zmana, b'shas shchita. Okay, that's how we're saying it right now. So how about these other things? Okay, fine. So that's the shvichas damim. But are you telling me that the spilling of the leftover onto the yisoid, or the being marked to the leftover parts, will not possible if you have an improper machshava? Nan yochlo tehe machshava moeles elo beachilos baser. We only maybe know this when it comes to eating the meat of the carbon. Nan rabo shvichas shirayim akdaris imorim. Talmud ve'im ha'achi yochel b'shtei achilos akas madaber achas achilos adam ve'achas achilos mizbech. So in fact is that anytime there's either achilos adam or there's achilos mizbech, then pigul will be ma'akiv. So therefore it will passel. So apparently when you're remarked through the imorim, that's considered to be achilas mizbech as well as shvichas shirayim. Lokasha had yermer hareini zayrik. I'm going to sprinkle almanas lishmach shirayim lamachar. Had yermer hareini shayvich shirayim almanas lahakter imorim lamachar. So if you had the original intention, let's get this down properly, that, and let's look at Rashi, called the milsa be'inan machshava, you have to have a machshava b'shas avoda, regarding an avoda, al davar achilas adam ol mizbeach. You have to have that machshava about something about achilas dam or mizbeach. Hilka chishe b'shas shvicha shirayim. If you have an intention while you're doing even the shvicha shirayim al achilas basar, about eating the meat, lo klumhi, that's nothing. Why? Delo havoi machshava b'shas avoda. That's not considered to be b'shas avoda. So these things, let's get this down again. So if you said hareini shayfich shirayim almanas lahakter imorim l'machar, that's nothing because it's not b'shas avoda. However, if a person says, I'm going to do the zrika, right, which is b'shas avoda, with this improper machshava, then it taka would be pigul. Okay. I believe that's how we're supposed to read that. Okay. Alma Rabbi Yehuda Bered Rav Chia Shemaiti Shetfilas Etzba Mafagelas Bechatas Penimus. Okay, it's a whole mouthful there. That if a person dips their finger, which is the avoida by the chatas apnimus, as Rashi brings down over here, that ha'amoyer b'chatas apnimus, the tava koin etzba, he dips his finger into the blood, mifageles b'chatas. If he has the improper thought while he's doing that, im tavel amadas ha'hakter imorim l'machar, and his intention is chutz lizmanoi, so that'll be considered pigul. So Shama Ilfa, Ilfa heard this, and Amr Kameda Rab Pada, Imer Klum Lamanu Pigul El B'Shlamim. I only learned this issue not by Chatas, but rather only by carbon Shlamim. Because if you learn about the din of Pigul, Rashi says the Iker Pigul B'Shlamim Ksiv. The Achal Yachal B'Shlamim Ein Behen Tfilas Etzba. There's no din of Tfilas Etzba by Shlamim. Shekol Hadamim B'Zrika Min a Kli L'Mizbeach. When it comes to a shlamim, you take it from a klisharis and it's thrown onto the mizbeach. Chutz ben achatas shehi b'matanas etzba. Achatas is different because, like, you sin like with your hands, right, with your fingers. So there's an element of etzba over there. So it's dafko when it comes to achatas. So when it comes to shlamim, ma shlamim and tvilas etzma vagelos behen, because it doesn't exist, there is no action of using your fingers. So avchatas and tvilas etzma mafagelos behen. It shouldn't be mafagel by this avoda, because the whole notion of pigul is from shlamim, so it's got to be like a shlamim. But by shlamim there is no element of tvilas etzba. So v'chi hakol mishalmin l'manu. 1 second. I know shlomim is the ikar, as Rashi says, but is that all we learn from there? If that's the case, then ma shlomim sholishman in moitzim midi pigul. So just if you want to say that, when it comes to a shlomim, sholishman, that it was brought without the proper intention, ein moitzim midi pigul, it doesn't remove it from pigul. Avchatas sholishma ein moitzim midi pigul. So when it comes to chatas, Shlo Shema also should not be moitzim midi pigul. Look at Rashi. Im shachat b'machshavas chutz l'zmanoi. So let's say a person has, again, chutz l'zman, which is a pigul thought, v'kibel v'hoilich, shlo l'shman, and then he continues also to have a shlo l'shma thought, well, yotzim midi pigulasan. So the fact that now you have a different machshav about a different carbon, that doesn't remove the issue of pigul. Shar ein shaloi shaharei ein shalo l'shmo paisel b'shlamim. V'havi le karav hamatir k'mitzvah. So b'pigul b'lo psul machshava cheres. So the notion of pigul has to be like, that is the only problem. So therefore, when it comes to a shlamim, the fact that you originally had a pigul thought, and then afterwards you have a shlo l'shma thought, so that shlo l'shma thought will not remove the issue of pigul, and therefore you would think the same thing would be by a chatas, says Rashi. Even though chatas actually has a different stringency, because shlo l'shma as opposed to by a shlomim, we don't say it's possible. We say it's just not oil. It's not oil labal shem chayva, but it doesn't passel. Chatas is worse in that shlo l'shma passels it straight up. So even though shlo l'shma after pigul, you would think is worse because it passels the carbon. So you're going to say lo totzemi de pigul. It's not true. We already learned a pesach chatas shachted chutz l'zmanoi. Let's say you have a chatas who's shechted with this pigul machshava, the kibul v'hoylech v'zark shlo l'shma, and then afterwards you have a shlo l'shma machshava, zehu shlo karev hamatir k'mitzvasai. So then it's no longer allowed to be brought. Ve'no pigul li'anish kares al chilasai. So there's no iser of kares on eating it. Why? Says Rashi, because kol hamatir dehainu arba vodos below psul machshava acheres. It has to be that when it comes to pigul, it can't be that there's any other psul. to be chayiv kares for a pigul. But in this case, because chatas shalol shma actually pasels it, so therefore that removes the issue of pigul. And therefore, because of that, technically, when it comes to a chatas, if you would eat this carbon, you haven't violated pigul, because the shalol shma removes the pigul to be chayiv you at least to the level of being chayiv kares. But according to you, you're basically saying that just like shlomim, the shalol shma doesn't remove the pigul, so too by chatas the shalol shma should not remove the pigul. But that's not true. So v'chi hakol mishlomim manu ima shlomim shalol shma in motzimidi pigul av chatas shalol shma in motzimidi pigul. Well, that's true. El ma'isal chamemar mariba dekroi ka'asyan. So we learn out from these a ribo in the psukim. So hachinam mariba dekroi dekra ka'asi. So says Rashi, kol hazvachim lepigul b'toras kohanim, that there's a din by all the karbanos. V'lo mishlomim l'manu, not that we learn it dafka from shlomim to say, oh, therefore it doesn't work when it comes to the etzba, that the tefillas etzba by chatas cannot be mafagel. No, it is mafagel. It says from shlomim. But if you're going to learn out from shlomim, then you would say that the whole din of pigul would fall off once it's shalol shmo, which you're not going to say such a thing. Okay, question 10. That was a hard question, but let's see. Actually, let's start off with question 9. Be'eza oifin mari l'maskan na b'reisting tainu inin pigul kabbalah lo'oisa ba machshava kamaisa. So what does that mean by kabbalah? It means a machshava during shchita al manas l'kabel dam l'machar. So in that case, the lo puzzle the ilu al manas lizrok dam l'machar puzzle. If you have a machshava about during the time of shchita that you're going to do the zrika shalom bezmanoi, so that is an achila. It's an avoda and it's an achila, and that will achilas mizbeach, and that would constitute a psul of pigul, even fine. However, if you have a machshava of shchita amanas kabel dam, that there's no din pigul. Okay, question 11. No, that was question 9. Question 10. Tani chan et tfilas etzba mafagelos b'chatas. So tani inach ena mafagelos. Ketzad misparshim habraisos ba'oifen delo pligi ahadadi. That's not so clear. Okay, we didn't do this. All right, it sounds like we did it, but we didn't do it. So apparently, at least up until now, we see clearly that apparently a chatas. And this is chatas penimius, right? This kind of does answer the question. But chatas penimius, there is a din pigul. Chatas chitzainus not. We'll get to that really in tomorrow's daf. We're not going to see. Maybe actually we may actually get to that at the very end. Okay. Omer Rabbi Shimon Levi. Ba'aliyash zu shemaiti, that I heard that shetfilas etzba mafagelas. That again, that when it comes to a carbon chatas, that when the kohen does the tfilas etzba, if he has an improper machshava that b'shash zrika is going to be shalom bezmana, that's mafagel. So in this, the Hebrew Rav Shimon ben Lakish, she asked the question: Klum l'manu pigul el mishlomim. So malu shlomim in tfilas etzba mafagelos behen, because it doesn't exist, because you have to just do zrika from a klisharis. Avchatas ain't tfilas etzba mafagelos behen, right? So then on this we said v'chi hakom mishlomim manu. If that's the case, ma shlomim shalosh shmonei motzimidi pigul, which we know is true. So avchatas shalosh shmonei motzimidi pigul, certainly not, right? We don't say that. We say that because a chatas pasels shalosh shma, that removes the iser kars by pigul. So Rav Yosef Rabbi Chanina in hakom mishlomim manu. We don't learn completely from shlomim. Hoyel v'chutzlim koimo poisel b'shlomim, because we learn chutzlim lim koimo. If you have an improper machshava of the wrong place, that will learn out from a shlomim. Shlol shmo poisel b'chatos. When it comes to shlol shmo, we say we learn that it is puzzle. We learn that out from machatos. So ma chutzlim koimoi poisel b'shlomim. Just like if you have an improper machshava pigul during by carbon shlomim. Moitzimidi pigul. So once you have, apparently, even by a shlomim, that once you have an improper machshava pigul, so moitzi midi pigul. Let's just see what Rashi says over here. Okay, let's just continue this. Af shlosh shmo paisa b'chatas moitzi midi pigul, which we know when it comes to chatas, it is moitzi midi pigul. That once you shlo shma, it's moitzi midi pigul. So too, when it comes to if you have a machshava pigul, it will passel. It will be moitzi midi pigul. Like one pigul will be moitzi the other pigul. Okay. Rabbi Yirmiyah mitzad taver. This whole thing can be broken. Malachutzim kaimo by shlomim. Hapoisel b'shlomim. It passels by shlomim. Shechein noig b'chol Zevachim. It's noig by all karbanos. Tarmi b'shol shma shein a noig el b'pesach v'chatas bulvad. However, when it comes to shol shma, that only applies to pasel, pesach, and chatas. So maybe you cannot apply this from the din of pigul. El ma'isel chamemer davar hapoisel behen moitzin midi pigul. Something which pasels it will remove pigul, because pigul has to be there's nothing else wrong with the carbon. So davar hama'ake behen, something which is ma'ake, like the dal avodos, mevin lidi pigul. So hachinami davar hapoisel ba, like shlo shma, which will pasel it, paisel ba moitzin miad pigul. Will also remove pigul. So any shlo shma can remove pigul. Davar ma'akev ba mevin lidi pigul. So something which is ma'akev, even like the dipping of the finger, because that is ma'akev, could be moitz, would also be maybe will be mevili pigul. Okay. Omer Rav Mari Afan Anavitanina Zeklal. What was the general rule? Kol kaimitz, anyone who does the kmitz with a mincha, but nice and bekli, you put into a kli sharis, v'ha moilich, and you transport it. But makder, and you're makder, it's obishal bekaimitz hainu sheichet. Moilich hainu moilich. Makder nami hainu zarek. El nice and bekli, when you put into a kli, my knee, what is that? Elim, but the dam of kabbalah is like accepting the blood. So mi dami hasam emela. The blood falls directly into a kli. Hacha iyuka shakel v'rami. You're putting it into you're the one that's grabbing it, right? El kivan duloy sagi duloy yoyev al karche chavoida chashuvahi. Since you have to do it, so it's considered avoida chashuva. Hakanami kivan duloy sagi duloy avid la al karche hainu haylacha. So that apparently means that's referring to halacha is also considered to be an avoida. Well, oyom dedamil kabbalah. Maybe we're actually comparing it to kabbalah, not halacha, because halacha you don't necessarily need to do. With the kabrit hacham amela hasam ihu kashakal v'yoyev kivan matan klihu malimela mali kashakal v'yoyev. The fact is they're both with a kli, so it doesn't matter if you do it or the blood just drips into it. It's the same thing. So lemekatanoi. The tani chada tfilas etzma mafagelos b'chatos. As we said before, that if you toivel your finger into a carbon chatas with a wrong machshav, that's a pigul. The tani idach lo mafagelos, it says beferish not that way. V'lo mispagelos. So my lav tanoihi. Lo harabanan harav shimon. Rav Shimon my irit tfilas etzma. What is he talking about that specifically? Ha'omer, as we continue down with Aleph, kol she'enu al mizbeach achitzayin b'shlomim ein bo mishum pigul. El haba ha'rabbanim lo kasha kan b'chatas hachitzayinis kan b'chatas ha'pinimius. This is what we said before. This is question 10. So when it comes to chatzis chatois hachitzayinis on the outside, Rashi helps out a little bit and says enu mifagelas. However, we said before that when we're talking about the tfilas etzba mifagelas b'chatas pinimis, that's what it says beferish. So that's a distinction. So Gemara says chatzas hachitzayinis pshita. The chatzas on the outside, obviously, it's not going to be pigul. Lo ksibahu v'taval, because it doesn't say v'taval. So of course there's no pigul. So it's hoya v'ksiv v'lakach, and says you take it. The e asi kaif. Let's say a monkey comes, ramilhu a yade, and he throws it on his finger. Boila mishkol zimnachriti. You'd have to do it another time. So it's kamandich siv a tavel dummy. It's comparable, like it's like sprinkling it. Kamash malan lahachi lo ksiv a tavel damash mahachi mash mahachi. Okay, we'll stop there. But again, that is the basic idea that even though it's true, a shlomim doesn't have this din of the sprinkling with the etzba. It's only by a chatas. When it comes to the shlomim, it's zrikas dam. Doesn't make any difference. We're not going to completely compare it to a shlomim, and therefore, in fact, when it comes to a chatas, this is also going to be pigul. If you have an improper machshava shlom zmanai, so then it will end up becoming pigul. Now, that's only by chatas panimis, but not by chatas chitzonis. Okay. So that was question 10. Maybe we have another question. Let's see. TA. TA 23. Hashaychet al manasa kabel o lishbay shirayim l'machar ha'im hu pigel. Okay? So you have intention to be makabel the dam, or to sprinkle the shirayim at the wrong time. Is that considered to be pigel? So al manasa kabel ein zu pigel, because it has to be at a time of chila. Amanats lishbach shirayim, then havi pigel, which is basically what we said up here, which is comparable to question 9. This is TA 23. TA 23. Because b'shas zrika, there's the din pigel. However, if the b'shas shchiti says almanas kabel, then it's not going to be an issue. Okay. TB 25. Him tvilas etzba b'chatas mefagelos maskana deleka plugta de tanoi bebraisa. So that one I wrote yesh hebdel ben chatas pnimis v'chatas chitzainis. So I didn't write what it is. So by chatas pnimis yesh pigul, and chitzainis ein pigul, which is basically the same as question 10. Adkan.